Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello, welcome to an analytical session on the role of cryptocurrency in the neoliberal political economy. The role of cryptocurrency is becoming increasingly mainstream, most importantly by the United States. Now, there are other countries from El Salvador to the United Arab Emirates that have taken steps to bring crypto into the mainstream, but the United States economy in nominal GDP value is the world's largest economy, and it has taken very serious steps in the last 6 months during the Trump administration, whose family and of course he personally are involved in issuing their own crypto. And by the way, according to the Washington Post, 20%, 1 out of 5 cabinet members and officials in the Trump cabinet are all invested in cryptocurrency, which gives us an indication of where this particular administration is headed with regard to a major theme that I would like to develop today, because there are many ways that cryptocurrency can be approached. I'm not interested in looking at it from the perspective of a Wall Street analyst and where it's headed in terms of the ups and downs and its relationship with gold and tangible assets or hard currencies. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is more in the domain of macroeconomics and what it means for society and for the masses, for the working class and the middle class. Clearly, there have been some people that that are called crypto millionaires that have made a lot of money from crypto. We will see the percentage. We will also look at, based on availability of statistics, how many people not just made money, but on the average, in a down year, for example, 2022, 2023, which were down years, especially 22 when there was a crash in crypto, we will see how many people on average lost money as well. But crypto really is a very serious issue precisely because the US government under the presidency of Donald Trump, which, as I said, 20% of officials in that cabinet are invested in crypto. So public policy is made with crypto in the background as an asset, because it is not a currency according to the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS in the United States, okay, and the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. This is not a currency. This is not to be compared with the euro or the dollar. It is a digital currency, which is an asset, and it is based purely on speculative value. In other words, people buy, they sell, they trade the asset, and the value reflected, which currently stands at close to $3 trillion, by the way, on a world scale. This is a currency that has attracted the attention of even the most dogmatic opponents of crypto, from billionaires like Kevin O'Leary, the Canadian American billionaire, to chief executive officers like Jamie Dimon, the man who is heading the world's largest bank, JP Morgan, another very important critic historically. Uh, these people have turned around. Why? A very simple reason. When the government decided to put a corporate safety net, the way they do for banks, the way they do for insurance companies, the corporate sector, under the corporate welfare state in the neoliberal economy, when the government decided to do that and to integrate crypto into the mainstream of the monetary system and the investment community, the investment system, and in fact to offer incentives and under executive orders, as we will see, of the president, compel banks to offer crypto-based loans. In other words, use crypto as collateral for loans on the hard currency, based on the hard currency, namely the dollar. When these people had that kind of a safety net, that kind of corporate welfare safety net, which means, by the way, for those of you who are not in economics, it just means that the taxpayer money is behind this. When they saw that opportunity, and when big institutional investors, as of course, and of course, billionaires as well, and members of the political class, like I said, 20% of Trump's cabinet, when they saw that kind of opportunity, they jumped into the bandwagon of crypto. And even if they don't invest directly, they buy companies that buy crypto. And this is, according to Fortune magazine in the United States, this is the latest, hottest trend in cryptocurrency, this indirect investment. Now, what does the word cryptocurrency mean? Crypto is a Greek word which means secret or hiding. And in fact, that was the purpose to, and by the way, the cryptocurrency is based, another Greek word, on cryptography, which is an ancient art, by the way. Cryptography is the writing of that is secret, that is in codes. And this goes back, by the way, in case people are wondering, this is not the result of high technology, high tech. It's not symptomatic of the high tech industry, although the high tech industry, of course, is the key to crypto. It made it possible. This goes back to ancient Egypt, to the Greeks, and long before computers, there was cryptography. But that's what it means. The question is, why is it secret? Why is it cryptocurrency? Secret currency, currency that is hiding. It's private and it's beyond the watchful eye of regulators. It is something that is not in the mainstream of the basket of hard currencies, for example, that the International Monetary Fund uses to make currency stabilization loans to governments around the world, or the World Bank uses to make development loans for mega projects on a world scale. That's not the kind of currency this is. This is a speculative asset. It only exists in the internet. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It is also a currency. A lot of people may be surprised because of the hype of crypto and the idea that somehow those who invest in crypto become ipso facto, automatically they become millionaires or billionaires. A lot of people may be surprised that there are only 15,000 firms on a world scale. Okay, this is a world that has 8 billion people. There are only 15,000 firms, of those 2,300 in the US, that accept crypto. Although this is going to change gradually, especially now, as we'll see, with legislation that and executive orders that Trump has introduced, namely the Genius Act, as we'll see, of July 2025. This is going to change as banks are compelled to make loans based on crypto, and credit companies like MasterCard will be using it as a base, as an equivalent to currency, somewhat, let's say. In any case, we'll get more into that. There are 300 to 450 million firms in the world, estimated, by the way. 8 billion people, 300 to 450 million firms. Only 15,000 accept crypto. Why? It's been around since 2009. Invented, by the way, Bitcoin was the first, invented by either one or a group of Japanese people who decided, right on the heels of the Great Recession of 2008, this is the beginning of 2009 that it was introduced, in January, they decided to introduce Bitcoin, and it immediately caught fire in China, although China, which has a long-standing tradition of a paternalistic government, and has never, even under the reform since the 1980s of various governments under integrating the economy into the world capitalist system, all the way to today under Xi Jinping, China has always been very concerned about the predominance of the private sector in guiding monetary policy or fiscal policy or investment policy or economic policy. The fact is the central government has enormous role. So China quickly realized that there was, that there was something wrong here, although at one point back in 2017, 2018, China was a major, in fact, half of the Bitcoin business was carried out in China. It quickly moved away, as we'll see, and it took precautionary steps to make sure that speculative investment does not overshadow and undermine and dilute the mainstream economy based on the total value of goods and services. China took a different route than the United States. The United States adopted the purest neoliberal model of the financialization economy, which has been in force since back during the second Reagan administration. It still is. By the way, neoliberalism, just for definitions very briefly, I've talked about this in many sessions. I have videos on neoliberalism. Neoliberalism starts in the and historical antecedents are during the Carter administration. The institutionalization of neoliberalism is during the Reagan era. It takes off in the 90s with Bill Clinton, by the way. It's bipartisan. Both political parties have embraced neoliberalism. It means switching from social welfare to corporate welfare, providing corporate subsidies instead of strengthening the social safety net, corporate subsidies, strengthening private capital, reducing taxes on the rich to the degree that during the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s, taxes on the rich and corporations were up in the 70% category. Today, under 20, and the effective rate is actually close to 9%. So it's very low in comparison to what it was. And I'm not comparing it with a Democratic administration, but rather a Republican one in the 1950s. It means low taxes. It means an anti-labor policy and class warfare. The essence of neoliberalism is to weaken the working class, and when any society weakens the working class, Historically, in the 500-year history of capitalism, this means weakening the middle class. When weakening of the middle class takes place, that automatically means that liberal democracy, representative government, also weakens, and we have the road to authoritarianism. And this is exactly what has been happening under neoliberalism. The financialization simply means, by the way, that the value of the economy, the total value of an economy, is no longer counted on the kinds of metrics based on the aggregate production of goods and services, but rather speculative value of assets and cryptocurrency, which some economists call monopoly money. Others have different names for it: funny money, non-existing money, digital money doesn't exist anywhere, Ponzi schemes, and so forth. That's an asset. That's counted an asset, and it's close to 3 trillion. So you have basically an economy moving toward greater speculative direction. And one might argue, what's wrong with that? The whole object of a stock market, doesn't matter whether it's Wall Street or the London Stock Exchange or the Nikkei in Tokyo, the object of that is speculative. You bet on the future. You speculate whether it's commodities like coffee and sugar and so forth, whether they're going to go up, or whether it's metals, precious metals, gold and silver, or pharmaceutical companies. Investors bet on whether it's going to go up and down. So the speculation is indeed an inherent feature of capitalism. So one might argue, how is this? What's wrong with crypto? It follows the same rules of capitalism. Of course it does. It's a byproduct of the neoliberal economy, except for one thing, that the purpose of currency is to reflect the real economy, theoretically, and where it's going, where it's headed, the prospects of that economy. The purpose of crypto is not that. The purpose of crypto is to see how many buy, how many sell, and of course, to do it outside of the mainstream of the monetary system, outside the watchful eye of the regulators. And there is something else, and I'm going to talk about this a great deal, and that is outside the watchful eye of the taxman. In other words, this is a product that it lends itself to tax evasion. Okay, that is the nature of crypto. Although there have been attempts to bring it, especially in the European Union, regulators, to bring it within the watchful eye of regulators and to have these people pay taxes. It is also, and again, we'll look at that a little bit more in detail, it is also a product widely used. According to statistics, 20 to 30% of its use is in criminal activities globally: organized crime, drug cartels, human trafficking, illegal cigarettes and guns. You name it, anything illegal has used crypto. So the question, this reminds me of the late Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger was the partner of what's his name, Warren Buffett, and Berkshire Hathaway Fund, the investment fund. He said at one point, did the world really need a cryptocurrency to be used by criminals, by people who are kidnappers and so forth. And so this gives you an idea of, and this, by the way, someone, Munger was the conservative of the duo group here. Warren Buffett, more liberal, more with the Democratic Party, Munger with the GOP. So this is the sort of thing that you have when you have this kind of talk from someone who comes from a rather conservative background, and he's plainly stating this is a digital currency, this is a product to be used by criminals. Now the question is, why has it caught fire all over the world? Part of the reason is because capitalism is a political economy which instills a value system of capital accumulation and, of course, greed in human beings. Another part of the reason is because, and of course, crypto enthusiasts always point this out, it's a hedge on inflation. Well, can you really trust central banks issuing money which is inflationary, because there's a fiscal package that goes with that money, that is the spending and the budgetary spending. That means they spend more than they take in, they borrow. The US is a classic example. So why not put it in something like this, a private fund? That's true. A lot of people have that kind of fear, and they look to hedge their bets. And there is something else about human nature. There has been, in the last 50 years almost of the neoliberal economy, a downward pressure on social mobility, downwards living standards across, especially across the Western world, including especially in the United States, owing to the neoliberal economy, which moved massive amount of capital. 1% of America's richest people own more wealth than the bottom 90%. That's an important statistic. So people even with a little money, they figure, I'll invest in crypto, make some money for myself. So there is that sort of mentality and mistrust of the government, which comes as part of the neoliberal ethos. The neoliberals have disdain for the state, which by the state they mean the Keynesian state. They don't mean the corporate welfare state, which buttresses capital, strengthens capital in the military industrial complex. They don't mean that state. They mean the state that provides social development. That's the state that they're talking about when they have disdain for the state. They don't mean the state that provides as a corporate safety net for cryptocurrency, like JP Morgan Chase admitted. Well, if they're going to provide that kind of safety net, of course we'll look at it and get into it. Now there are 560 million crypto owners, it is estimated, worldwide. 560 million crypto owners worldwide. Of those, let's look at realistic statistics, 173,000, a tiny fraction of 1%, 173,000 are millionaires. And very few of those, very few billionaires. In 2022, the average crypto owner lost more than $7,000 that year. And the losses lingered in 2023. So the question is crypto living up to the hype, given the enormous volatility of this asset, this speculative purely? Like I said, the IRS doesn't see this as a currency. This is not the dollar, it's not the euro. It exists only in the internet. People buy and sell, and it's based on that kind of speculative value, the value that the buyer and the seller attribute to it, and it's about supply and demand of this speculative product. Okay, this is why some economists call it a Ponzi scheme, others call it monopoly money. The contradictions in crypto are astounding. I'm not going to go through all of them because there's so many. One of the problems, one of the glaring contradictions is crypto apologists argue that we want money that is not under the watchful eye of the government because the government can't do anything right. And we want money to be issued by a private entity, including, by the way, Silicon Valley companies like Apple, Meta, Google. They all want to issue their own money. Dollar isn't good enough for them. The yen isn't good enough for them. The yuan isn't good enough. The euro is not good enough. They want their own money. Why do they want their own money? Based on the assets of their companies and corporate bonds. And what if there is panic selling like in 1929 or 2008? Massive. What happens to their companies? Are they willing to back up all the currency all the crypto that they would have issued? This is the kind of reckless behavior. But the contradiction here is not just that. The contradiction is that while they claim we want to be free of the government, they then invite the government to subsidize them. Yes, the government subsidizes crypto. And the Trump administration has made it constantly in the last 6 months. It has taken steps to make it more official. As soon as Donald Trump won, by the way, the election back in November 2024, crypto went up. And then as he kept signing executive orders and introducing the Genius Act, for example, in Congress in July, the more he got into it, he even had a gala for crypto, inviting a couple of hundred millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires for a gala dinner to invest in his crypto. Something that, by the way, didn't sit well with a lot of congressmen and a lot of senators and a lot of political observers and a lot of people looking at this as, at the very least, unethical, if not something that is contrary to what the president of the United States should be doing, and that is using the office of the White House to be doing this sort of thing, to be promoting an asset that the president, his family are personally involved in. This is not just a question of business ethics. It is a question of, historically in the United States, of politicians, although they don't do it, historically, especially the president, keeping the assets in a blind trust, so that public policy is not designed the way it is now to further an asset value in which the president or people in the cabinet have investments in and enhance those investments. So public policy cannot be based on that. The question of what is it based on? Let's face it, public policy. This is an important topic, by the way. The more I reflected on it, I have reflected on this for the last few years, the more I realized that the 1970s theory coming out of some major European economists and sociologists and historians, political scientists, on the theory of the state. What is the role of the state here? What is the state doing today? Promoting a digital currency, a non-existent currency. It's not a hard currency. IMF does not have it in its bucket of currency, hard currencies. on which to make stabilization loans, neither does the World Bank. In fact, both very skeptical. Both have issued public statements on what they think of this. The FDIC, the same thing. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, by the way. That's what FDIC stands for in Washington, D.C., out in Arlington, Virginia. This is an issue that's very serious about what is the role of the state. Is the role of the state to issue money to protect society and to bring equilibrium? Let me point out, by the way, that in the 17th century, the late 17th century, 1668, in fact, was the first central bank created, was the Bank of Sweden, the Swedish Riksbank, as it was called. And then, of course, followed by the Bank of England, then the French central bank in 1800 under Napoleon Bonaparte. The role of the central banks, the Europeans started this, was to have the government collaborate and determine monetary policy, collaborate with the private sector and the banks, the commercial banks, which of course are behind the central bank to this day, and to make sure that there is market equilibrium. This has evolved historically. Let's face it, the central bank under the capitalist system, its role was always to buttress the capitalist system, to make sure that the economy grows, inflation is kept at reasonable levels, that this is an issue of social and economic, social engineering and economic development under social engineering. So so currency plays a very important role. And the question, of course, with currency is, in whose control should monetary policy be? Now, a lot of people assume, because obviously they, unless they have studied it in college, they assume that monetary policy, because there is a central bank and behind the central bank is the government, which, by the way, also borrows from the central bank and historically has done so to go to war, for example. But for what purpose does a country go to war historically under the capitalist political economy, other than to strengthen capitalism, to strengthen capitalist interests, to pursue balance of power issues geopolitically, so that they can further geoeconomic interests back home and among their allies. That's the purpose. Okay. Now, a lot of people assume, however, this is just government, as though the government is some entity out in Mars, or in the case of the US, the deep state, as though there's a shallow state as well. The deep state. Well, government is really behind the central banks. It doesn't matter whether it's the Fed or the Bank of England, any central bank, the European Central Bank, for example, the Bank of Japan. The idea is that that institution is providing liquidity at levels to make sure that inflation is kept at reasonable levels, to achieve a level of growth desirable to keep employment rates at certain levels. This is Keynesian thinking, of course. John Maynard Keynes is very influential in the interwar period, even in the 1940s. And behind them, by the way, are commercial banks, the big commercial banks. And central banks are not catering to some potato farmer in Idaho or some auto worker in Michigan or in Indiana. They're not doing that. They're catering to stock market entities, that is corporations. They're catering to big capital. Policy of the monetary system of central banks is designed to strengthen capital, not labor. All one has to do is historically take the long view on this and look historically at who has benefited from monetary policy, from central banking. Now, central banking has been challenged. It was challenged in a number of countries, Private money, the idea of private money, and crypto is private money, by the way, is not new. From 1837, the post-Jackson period, to 1863, when Lincoln, during the Civil War, when Lincoln was president, there were in the U.S., a number of private entities. This is, by the way, 1837 to 1863 is called the free banking era. There were a number of basically free banks, private firms, issuing money. Okay. And presumably they did it on, they issued banknotes on the basis of state bonds. So even in the 19th century, in the mid 19th century, they were well aware, just as they are now. That's why Trump has signed all these executive orders, and the Senate and Congress has passed the Genius Act. They realized then the exact same thing that they realize now, that you can't operate a currency outside the laws of the monetary system, that everything is subject to the monetary system. So they use state bonds, presumably, by the way, and it wasn't really all of these experiments, every one of them failed. They used state bonds as to back up their private money, and all of them failed. So it's not reinventing the wheel. Crypto is not reinventing anything. In a different form. The technology, of course, wasn't there, obviously. Technology is what crypto is selling, right? We're selling you FTX and blockchain and new technology that's making all this possible. Okay, what is the purpose of all this? The technology is fine and dandy. What is the purpose of issuing this? This is no different than what they did in the 19th century. Okay. And like I said, the contradictions are glaring, because on the one hand, we believe in the private sector. We believe in free market, free enterprise, and the free market operating under its own rules. What its own rules? They go back every time and ask the taxpayer to support them, to subsidize them, and to bail them out. As we'll see, that's exactly what the US government did in the aftermath of the 2022 huge crisis in the crypto coin sector. In 2023, either 4 or 5 banks, I believe, had a crisis in the US. The government came through. That's when the government came through for them. Taxpayer money used because they gambled on cryptocurrency. Okay. And yet they claim we want to be free. If you want to be free, why are you asking for taxpayer supported assistance? All right. So the contradictions, like I said, are glaring. Now, people are free, and I believe this, are free in the capitalist economy. Even Karl Marx argued that we live in the capitalist system. We can't be outside of it. We're not on another planet. We are molded by it, so we play by its rules. They're free. If they want to go to Las Vegas and gamble their money, they're free to do that. They're free to do anything they want with their money. If they want to gamble it on what some economists call a Ponzi scheme or monopoly money, they're free to do that. Should they be asking for taxpayer subsidies and assistance? The fact is, crypto mining takes enormous amount of energy, and that's subsidized, by the way. Taxpayers are paying for it. Why should taxpayers be paying for that? You're free to gamble. You want to gamble, you want to speculate. But why are you asking the public to pay? And this goes to the heart of why big investors like Kevin O'Reilly, like JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, big investors who were skeptical about cryptocurrency 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, are now saying, well, wait a minute here. The government is saying, we're going to provide you with a corporate safety net. We're going to have the taxpayer subsidize you down the road, bail you out in 2023. The Biden administration, by the way, the governor of California, Newsom, was involved in that. He had gotten a lot of campaign money. Democrat, by the way, not a Republican. Democrats, by the way, I want to make sure this is a point is made very clearly. This is not an issue of one party or another. It is an issue of both political parties. Both political parties accuse each other, of course, and both go after each other. One goes after the other. Oh, yes, you made money selling stock on insider trading information, presumably the charge made against Nancy Pelosi, for example. The fact is they have insider trade information, and they make public policy having investments in certain assets, and they know that public policy will yield. Although they accuse each other, many of them are invested in assets that they argue the other benefits from. The net loser is the working class, by the way, and the middle class, which subsidizes these speculative assets. It's not the it's not the political class. In 2022, I'm going to move on to the 2022-2023 crisis. In 2022, as I said before, there was a crisis. It came in part from the collapse of the FTX crypto exchange company headed by a very young man. His name is Sam. Some people may be familiar with this. Sam Bankman-Fried. Sam Bankman-Fried became the poster boy for what is wrong with crypto. He was the CEO of FTX. Now, there had been unconfirmed reports in social media and so forth, some independent sources, that the young man was really naive. He was taken advantage of by others who had him as a front man, because we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar operation here. And this multi-billion-dollar operation collapsed. Apparently, according to press reports, billions of customers' money was diverted. Remember that year, 2022, according to statistics, the average crypto owner lost $7,100. Not made, lost. So this is, by the way, crypto owners and crypto enthusiasts are like gamblers who, whether in Las Vegas or gambling on the ponies, they tell you stories of how much money they made. They never mention how much money they've lost, only how much money they made. They're no different. So this is the sort of mentality that prevails. How much money have I made? Did I make the month of May 2024? Not how much money I lost in December 2022. Okay, never, because it's embarrassing. It's always the success of the investment. In any case, the young man was found guilty, 25 years prison, enormous amounts in fines. Others also have been found guilty, and some went to prison, others imposed fines. In March 2025, the Trump administration pardoned some crypto convicts. And immediately the price of crypto rose. This was another signal that the Trump administration, and by the way, some Democrats, I don't know, again, I don't want to make this sound like it's an issue for the GOP or the president. This is a bipartisan issue. Some Democrats went along with this. Some Democrats also made money. Newsom out in California, an investor himself, a person who had taken money from crypto firms, okay, crypto investors. The crisis of 2022 spilled over in 2023 when several banks, most of them in California, had invested in crypto, lost customers' money. That's when the FDIC came out and said, okay, we have to be very mindful of this asset value. That is high risk, it's very volatile, it fluctuates wildly. Those who have followed cryptocurrency, the history of cryptocurrency values, you know that it's in wild fluctuation moods. It depends what one thinks of it. But in any case, the federal government did bail out, and the question, of course, was what if there were in 2023 a situation as right now is being set up in the United States, where crypto is an integral part of the monetary system and the banking system. And instead of a few trillion lost, taxpayer money, by the way, 50 trillion, more than almost double, I shouldn't say more. The US economy is, let's say, around 29 trillion. Let's say, what if 50 trillion were lost? Who would bail out the US? In 2008, during the Great Recession, China helped out buying treasury bonds to stabilize the dollar. It did it to stabilize its own economy and to keep employment levels high, by the way. China always has market equilibrium and employment stability. Keynesian, not so much Marxist, Keynesian economics, not neoliberal economics. Financialization is very different than financialization policies, which means that the value of an economy is based on the speculative value of the market. It's very different than this sort of thinking that Xi Jinping is following, which is how can we stabilize the economy, stabilize employment, make sure that there are no excess, make sure there's market equilibrium, make sure we achieve that 5% GDP growth, which they have, of course, under central planning, and make sure we minimize the risks, keep inflation relatively low. The FDIC, in the aftermath of the banking crisis precipitated by crypto in 2022-2023, issued a warning. And the warning was to the banking system that we have to be closely supervising what is going on in this asset value. The fact is that the federal government, this institution, like I said, in Washington, D.C., was seriously concerned that the taxpayer would be unduly burdened. It would be heavily burdened in case of a major banking crisis. One of the fears I remember back in 2023, by the way, was what if there's a spill over effect, and the major banks, the top 5 banks in the United States, which I include, by the way, Goldman Sachs as the investment bank in this, what if they got infected by this? How would they handle it? So we are talking about, they would all run to the government and ask for bailouts. The way they did, an insurance company, the same thing, back in 2008. In other words, they would ask the taxpayer to bail them out, weakening the monetary system, weakening the purchasing power of the general taxpayer of the working class and the middle class. This is the core of the problem, that crypto is viewed monolithically, as though, these people who promote it are wearing horse blinders and refuse to take them off to see the multifaceted effects of what this is doing being integrated into the mainstream, when in fact, as the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, says, this is not a currency. This is an asset. It's a commodity. Call it what you will. It exists in the internet, but it's not a hard currency. It doesn't represent the aggregate value of goods and services and the prospects down the road of the economy. It doesn't represent anything other than speculation. So the question is, does the state, the political class, which is in charge, and behind the political class, we know that Project 2025, behind which were 6 billionaire families, this group of families, the largest, the richest families in the United States, that produced this document and handed it over to the Trump administration, and they're behind the Trump administration. The policies the Trump administration is following are those policies. He is following the rule book of those 6 billionaire families, think tanks in front of them, they're way in the back. And crypto, okay, is right there when in fact, crypto is well known to include, like I said, between 20 and 30% globally of the activity is organized crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, illegal activity, not to mention tax evasion, by the way, not to mention money laundering. So this is a domain that naturally lends itself from the very beginning, from its birth. This is why in China they banned it, by the way. In the European Union, very skeptical. This is not to say that the European Union has completely distanced itself, but it's guarding itself, and it's looking at ways to regulate it, okay, to make sure that it doesn't bring down the house of cards. That's the issue here, to make sure that this part of the economy, which, like I said, this is a lot of money that people are investing in indirectly. And I do want to go to the Trump administration's executive orders and the legislation that has been passed, the Genius Act. The Trump administration's goal is to integrate this as much as possible. The government does require banks to accept Bitcoin as collateral for mortgages. This would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Credit card companies to integrate crypto into the payment system. Corporate loans to be made with zero interest using Bitcoin and crypto as collateral. Again, unthinkable a few years ago, given the volatility of this internet-based digital currency. In other words, make crypto legitimate. On the sidelines, it was a product that those who were high rollers, speculators, were interested in making quick money, and they were using it to do so. Now, some banks have said, okay, we'll accept crypto, accept we're giving loans. However, they're doing it under their terms. They are agreeing to doing so as long as the government, as long as, and this becomes a legal issue, and this, I was reading a story of JP Morgan specifically, which is the largest bank in the US and the world, which handed this whole issue to their legal department because they want to make sure they write off bad loans. The other thing they are headed toward is, do we charge higher rates because we're taking higher risk when there is a loan based on collateral of crypto? And do we even acknowledge that crypto collateral is collateral? This is the sort of legal issues that come up with these banks, these giant banks. And the bottom line is that if a bank is going to be required by the state, and this is why I said earlier, the role of the state here as a philosophical issue, political science issue, sociological issue, I guess, is very important, because what is the state doing here? Compelling banks to integrate a product that they know, the state knows, the political class knows, is volatile. It is not based on anything other than speculation. So the banks are responding, okay, we'll minimize our risk, put the burden on the general taxpayer and on the borrower of that crypto collateral loan. So this is a very important issue. China, for itself, by the way, has banned crypto. This is the opposite position of the United States. Interestingly enough, China was one of the biggest crypto countries in the world. The Trump administration has said recently that he and his administration wants to make the United States the crypto capital of the world. I don't know if that's something to be proud of, by the way, because one needs to be cautious, very simply, not because there are 350 million lives at stake in the United States and their living standards, and the Genius Act and the executive orders that have been issued are considering putting, asking 401k investments, that is retirement funds, private retirement funds investments, for those of you outside the United States, private fund investments to include crypto directly or indirectly, companies invested in crypto, and putting in jeopardy the private retirement savings of millions of people. Very important. But in addition to that, $1.5 trillion Social Security money invested also in asset values that include crypto. So we are talking about a monumental step toward high risk investment here. And even mainstream companies, mainstream journalists in the field of business are asking questions. Where are we going with this? Now, this is all a byproduct of neoliberal thinking, that the state does everything, the public sector does everything wrong, the private sector does nothing wrong. It's like fallibility in the medieval. The papacy could do nothing wrong. It was divinely inspired by God. Same thing with private sector today. I don't know who inspires them, other than obviously the desire to maximize capital at the expense of society. But this is the thinking. We can do nothing wrong as long as we make money. The social consequences, the consequences to market equilibrium, they don't matter. What matters? Maximize my profit in the process. Unfortunately, there have been, and there are, those who are interested in doing your own research. You can go to the internet and type in pump and dump schemes in crypto. Okay. And there have been a lot of stories about such schemes, especially in social media, but also mainstream media, about getting rich quickly, and all over the world, by the way, and enticing the customer to invest and actually pumping up crypto artificially and then dumping crypto, and the customer is left with massive losses. One of the world's richest crypto, and I'll mention him because he has ties to China, to the United Arab Emirates, and to the Trump administration. One of the world's most famous, most influential, and most controversial figures is Changpeng Zhao, the CEO of Binance in China in 2017. Since then, moved it out of China. He is now listed as a citizen of the United Arab Emirates and the United States. Binance was the world's largest crypto exchange. He moved his operations to the UAE and to the US. And unfortunately, he has been found guilty. And in fact, the Justice Department went after him and found him guilty. The court found him guilty. He had to pay 4.3 billion in fine, or 43 billion, 4.3 billion, I believe, and a 4-month jail sentence. The UAE, by the way, has the world's largest concentration of cryptocurrency owners. It's followed by the US and Vietnam. There is a correlation when you look at statistics of countries that have a liberal position. By liberal, I don't mean the liberal like Democrat. In other words, a pro-crypto policy. There is a correlation between pro-crypto policy governments and authoritarianism. When you look at the pro-crypto regimes, El Salvador, United Arab Emirates, okay, the United States, especially under this administration, but this is bipartisan. There is a tendency to have policies that many economists call authoritarian neoliberal. Okay, these policies dilute democracy. The role of money. This is not the Middle Ages when lords had fiefdoms and they determined the fate of humanity in the barbarian West. One hopes we have moved away from the barbarian West 1,000 years ago. In the age of artificial intelligence, one hopes. However, we haven't, because here we are where the fate of humanity is handed over to a handful of people in the political class and the financial class, and those two have merged. And the fate of humanity may be in crisis. People like Changpeng Zhao, who, by the way, helped to set up the cryptocurrencies of the Trump family, these people are not interested in the welfare of humanity. One of the reasons he left China and went to the United Arab Emirates and the United States, where he operates, of course, is because China does not place the value of the private interests of an individual or a corporation above those of society, This does not mean that China is not a state capitalist economy. It is. The Communist Party, of course, is in charge, but the economy is well integrated into the capitalist world system, and it operates under the same rules. I want to close by giving you a little bit of an overview of what some institutions as well as individuals have stated about crypto. I mentioned Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, by the way, both serious reservations about cryptocurrency. Charlie Munger's famous saying that did the United States really need a currency for kidnappers? Jimmy Dimon called it at one time hyped up fraud. Now, of course, he's on the side of crypto because the state is behind it, and that's the kind of guarantee he was looking for. The IMF in 2022, I believe 2022 or 2023, when there was a crisis with crypto, came out and made it very clear that crypto is the domain of illegal activity and corruption on a world scale and recommended rigorous regulation. Transparency International issued a report basically reflecting the IMF, the International Monetary Fund report, stating that organized crime was very deeply involved in cryptocurrency on a world scale, in everything from human trafficking to drugs to money laundering operations, which have infected mainstream banking because money is laundered through banks. One of the interesting issues, by the way, about when I was doing research for this, and I was looking at on a world scale at which sector is friendliest to crypto, I was not that surprised to see that it was real estate, because real estate on a world scale is used to launder money. And then when I looked at when I looked at the Washington Post report on the Trump administration officials, 1 out of 5 is in crypto. Many of them come from real estate, by the way. So there is an issue. And then, of course, they have links to a country like El Salvador, which is a dictatorship, by the way, has a dictator. So we have a situation here where there is an issue of a digital currency that exists in the internet that is linked historically. It's only been around 16 years. And again, out of 300 million to 450 million businesses, fewer than 15,000 on a world scale accepted, most of them in real estate, by the way. Why is that? If it's the panacea for the economy, why is that? I do want to mention one other thing here that just happened a couple of days ago. The Trump administration nominated there was a vacancy in the Federal Reserve Bank, the central bank of the United States, and Trump picked an individual on 3 criteria. One is understandable. All presidents pick individuals who are close to them. In other words, they see eye to eye with them, have loyalty to them. But the other 2 were, was that individual friendly to crypto and to the economic nationalist policies through tariffs regime that Trump is, tariffs and crypto. The question, when I read the report, I don't know if it was the New York Times, I think it must have been the New York Times that I read it. I thought, okay, fine. So the solution now to extricating, for the US to extricate itself from the deep systemic problems, a close to $37 trillion public debt, the solution for that is crypto and tariffs, and the rest of the world hasn't figured this out. the US did, instead of competing head on, honest to goodness competition with China, the biggest rival. The US regards them as the rival and an enemy, of course, because they are the biggest rival, and economically, they're moving rapidly ahead of the United States. So this is how the US plans to overtake China, crypto and tariffs. This is a very serious issue. And I repeat what I said already, and I'll end it there. The capitalist economy for 500 years expands and contracts. It will contract. There are people constantly warning, but they do this all the time, constantly warning of recession is around the corner. Recession is around. We don't know when a recession is. A recession is built in. Recessions and deep recessions, like the one in 2008 and 1929, the Great Depression, are built into the system. Okay? Because capitalism is based on overproduction. And the consumption base is dropping. That is, consumer spending is dropping, especially in the country whose economy is based on consumer spending, namely the United States. What happens when there is another great recession? I won't say depression like the 1930s. I won't be dramatic about it. Great recession like 2008. And the BRICS group, which is emerging, it's already much stronger than the G7 economically on a world scale. And it's emerging to be, according to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, to be the dominant group in the world, because the world is breaking up into regional blocks, by the way, economically. And the United States gets into serious trouble because it has integrated crypto, which is hot air. And that's all it is. It's speculation for very few people to make money at the expense of society. Okay? This, again, does not mean that some people don't become billionaires and millionaires. Of course they do. This doesn't mean that speculation is not part of the stock market. Of course it is. But a company like Pfizer offers pharmaceuticals. Microsoft offers the technology. Intel offers the chip as such as it is. But what does cryptocurrency offer? Other than the process of speculation, who bails out the US that whose economy would have been diluted to such a degree that it would need trillions to be bailed out? That is where we will see sociopolitical crisis in the United States, and regrettably even more authoritarianism, because the other option is to allow for conditions to move toward the revolutionary course. So they will, unfortunately, conditions will get much, much worse unless there are regulatory measures intended to prevent this sort of thing. And those should be adopted now, not wait until there is a crisis. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you. Join this channel. Please become followers of this channel. There are more analytical sessions coming up on different topics. Thank you.